Hello everyone, I'm Strat Tom, and welcome to Stratopedia, where I look at the history behind your favourite strategy games. And today, we're continuing our 7-part series looking at the campaigns for Total War Rome 2. Last time, we looked at the Peloponnesian War and its aftermath. The Greek world was always looking eastwards when it was looking at rival civilizations that they either needed to fear and defend against, or eye up as potential conquests. However, the Greeks would ultimately be conquered not from the east, but from the west, from a land they derided as a land of mere barbarians. Today, we look at the rise of that great power emanating from the western Mediterranean. The Rise of the Republic campaign documents how Rome went from one of many Italian city-states and became Rome, the masters of all Italia. When discussing Rome, it is sometimes hard to disassociate it from all the imagery and connotations that a multi-continent-wide empire accrues over a millennia of existence. Today, we are going all the way back to 399 BC. At this point, Rome was just that, Rome. Not an empire, but a city-state that sat amongst various other city-states and tribes all over the Italian peninsula. This is not the grand city of marble and the Colosseum. Rome at this time is not putting the mighty Roman legions into the field, at least not as we know them. So, aside from Rome, who are the other major players that we need to know about? Well, I'm not going to rattle them off faction by faction, but I will deal with the broad strokes. To Rome's east are the Latins, a collection of city-states similar in culture to the Romans. To their north are the Etruscans. The Etruscans were not a unified people, but like with Rome and its Latin neighbours, they were a collection of city-states that shared a language and a culture and would sometimes band together in times of need, but more often than not act as rivals to one another. The first one that Rome had cause to deal with was the city of Veii. Veii was one of the first major cities conquered by the Romans, and so it has the unfortunate distinction of being the first of many stepping stones to Roman domination. Oh yeah, the Romans are gonna win. I hope that wasn't too much of a spoiler. Further north from the Etruscans were the various Gaelic tribes of the Cisalpine Gaul region. The Senones tribe and its chieftain Brennus will soon give Rome a reason to fear the Gauls for the next few centuries. Moving south down the Italian peninsula, there are the hill tribes, the most notable of which were the Samnites, who would prove an obstinate foe to Rome for decades. Down in the heel of the Italian boot was the region of Magna Gracia, whose name might give you a clue as to the type of people who lived there. Magna Gracia was ruled by a collection of Greek city-states that had migrated over from the mother country. Of course, the most dominant Greek city-state of the area was not on the Italian peninsula, but rather it was the dominant force on the island of Sicily, the Kingdom of Syracuse. And so, this is where you start at the beginning of the Rise of the Republic campaign. And how did it all happen in real life? Well, the Romans were a belligerent lot, and even prior to this time they had been fighting on and off with their neighbours. They had just wrapped up a brief war with their southern neighbours, the Volscians, and the next target was to the north, that first proper stepping stone I mentioned earlier, Veii. The war with Veii happened due to the Roman want and need to expand territorially, due to its expanding population and a conflict over the salt trade in the region. Most of the salt flats lay to the north of the Tiber, and Rome wanted full control. The Veiites were also feeling the pinch economically due to their trade with Carthage being disrupted by conflict with Syracuse. And so, what is it the cowboys say? This town ain't big enough for the both of us. Rome engaged in a war with Veii that lasted around 6 or 7 years depending on which source you read. They battled on and off, but neither one could land a killer blow. This is when Rome decided to just besiege Veii and attempt to starve them out. You see, Veii was built into the hills, and so the Romans could only really attack from one side, making a direct assault near suicidal. So, to keep the siege going, Rome had to do something it hadn't done before: keep its army in the field the whole year round. Like all armies of this era, the Roman army was a citizen body that was called into service at times of war, but when the campaign season was over, these men had farms to go and work. The Senate would supplement their lost income, marking the first time soldiers had received a salary for their work, and so the siege went on for a year, and then another. The soldiers and their officers started to grumble, and it made the Senate worried that discipline would slip, and so they sent in a man that they had just given the rank of dictator, the first of 5 times he would take up that office: Marcus Furius Camillus. Now, these days, the word dictator has very negative connotations, but in the days of the Roman Republic, a dictatorship was nothing to fear. In times of hardship, the regular practice of electing 2 consuls was suspended, and absolute power was entrusted to one man. However, when the crisis passed, these powers were rescinded and the Republic continued. The fact that he was entrusted with this position of absolute authority 5 times shows the esteem in which Camillus was held. However, his reputation would be marred for a short time not long after the fall of Veii. In order to break the siege, Camillus ordered sporadic attacks to be made on the walls to distract the Veiites from his real plan. The Romans were digging their way into the Veiite sewer systems. Once a Roman force had snuck inside, Camillus led a massive assault on the walls of Veii. It must have seemed like madness, right up until the moment the Veiites discovered that Romans were already inside the walls and were opening the gates. Veii fell, and the Romans did not hold back when it came to sacking the city and enslaving its population. So Camillus was a hero. How could his reputation possibly be ruined? Well, it seems that Camillus had beseeched Apollo to aid him in the taking of the city, and he had promised that 10% of the captured loot would go to the god for his help. In the chaos of the sack, that 10% was not set aside. Later, after the fact, Camillus would demand that his soldiers give up 10% of their loot. Furthermore, 10% of the land that was seized was also set aside for the priesthood of Apollo. Eventually, Camillus would be accused of stealing this land and treasure, and for it, he would be exiled. The legend has it that, as he left, Camillus asked the gods to bring misfortune to the ungrateful citizens of Rome, if the gods knew that he was innocent. It would seem that the gods did know that he was innocent, and did bring misfortune upon Rome. Enter Brennus. The chieftain of the Senones tribe, Brennus had been putting pressure on the Etruscans in the north, but decided that the rich, plump city of Rome looked ripe for plunder. Flush with victory, the Romans thought they could see off these barbarians no problem. But in actual fact, Brennus and his Gauls weren't no problem. They were a big problem. A big problem that smashed the Roman army to pieces and left the city entirely defenceless. Now, in here, there is an amusing story that is depicted in the logo of the Rise of the Republic campaign. The Romans were going through the humiliating ordeal of attempting to pay off Brennus and his Gauls so that they would leave them alone. When weighing out the gold to pay the Gauls, a Roman senator noted that the weights that the Gauls were using were crooked and that they were trying to scam them. Brennus, unhappy at being called a fraud, apparently then threw his sword onto the scales alongside his weights, remarking, "Woe to the conquered." After riding high with the conquest of Veii, the Romans were sent crashing back to earth. Their armies had been destroyed, and their city had been sacked and left in ruins to the point where they had considered abandoning it altogether. Furthermore, they had been humiliated by a barbarian who had extorted them massively just to leave them be. For the purposes of rebuilding and defending themselves, the Romans called upon their once disgraced hero, Camillus. There is a story that Camillus hastily raised a militia force and met Brennus and his Gauls in battle, defeating them and reclaiming Rome's stolen gold and lost honour. This story is almost certainly a later fabrication as a way of soothing the hurt Roman ego. But despite this obviously fabricated story, it is during this time that Camillus would achieve his heroic status and was often called the second founder of Rome for the way that he brought them back from the brink. After the sack of Rome, old enemies and allies alike started to eye up Rome and her territory as ripe for the picking. Camillus would put lie to that notion as he put out fires all over Roman territory, staving off enemy forces and resubjugating Latin lands that had decided that now was the time to break away from the Roman yoke. By the time of his death in the 360s BC, Camillus would have left Rome in a far more stable and powerful state than it had even been before the Gallic sack of the capital. Rome was resurgent and was now the dominant force in northern Italia, and for this, Camillus would be held up as one of the greatest Romans of all time. It would be 2 centuries before the legendary Scipio Africanus would rival Camillus for the title of Rome's greatest saviour. But we'll get to Scipio another day. Soon after, Rome would be embroiled in yet another large-scale conflict, this time against the Samnites, a hill tribe from the south. The Samnite Wars would end up involving all of the major powers of Italy, and would leave Roman dominance of the peninsula a foregone conclusion. However, the wars took 5 decades to be fully won, and the Samnites would prove to be the Romans' most obstinate foe to date. For simplicity's sake, I won't detail the entirety of the Samnite Wars, but there is one very important development that I wish to discuss. Up to this point, the Roman legions, like with most of their culture, had been emulating the Greeks. What I mean is, the Romans have been fighting using the Greek Phalanx as its primary battle tactic. A forward-facing, unbroken phalanx is a fierce formation to be facing. There was good reason that the Greeks had relied on it for centuries. However, a disrupted and disjointed phalanx was useless. The integrity of the shield wall was everything. When fighting the Samnites, the tribesmen would often retreat up into the hills of their homeland. On this rocky, uneven ground, the phalanx fell apart. On several occasions, the Romans were led into ambushes or forced to fight on unfavourable ground and were punished severely by the Samnites. The Romans were a proud people, steeped in tradition. However, they never let their sense of tradition win out over their sense of pragmatism. The phalanx was no longer fit for duty, so it was considered obsolete. In its place, we start to see a far more recognisable Roman legion, fighting in the style that would conquer the Mediterranean, the 3-line Monopole system. The word Monopole roughly translates as a handful, and as such, the Roman soldiers were split up into different units, or manipoles, of around 120 men. Unlike a phalanx, these manipoles could move independently of one another, and the leader of a manipole was given a degree of autonomy to act on opportunities or advantages that might arise. In addition to the update in organisation, the units were now armed with a shield and short sword rather than a spear, granting much more flexibility and the ability to react faster to flanking manoeuvres. A phalanx with joints is how it has been described. The 3 lines of the 3-line Monopole system differed in terms of a soldier's level of experience and seniority. The front line, the Hastati, were the youngest and least experienced. Being the youngest, the Hastati had the job of wearing down the enemy. They would join battle and fight with all their strength before they would usually start to tire and be pushed back. But that is when the second line would take over. More seasoned veterans who could be counted on to finish the job that the Hastati had started. The third line were the Elites, the Triarii. The Triarii still hung on to some of their past and still carried a spear along with a sword. They were the most decorated men of the legions, and given the cost of their weapons and armour, they were usually the richest of the infantry too. The Triarii were only called upon in the most dire of dire straits. with the first two lines usually being able to finish the jobs themselves. The Romans would use the phrase going to the Triarii in the same way that we might use the phrase throwing in the kitchen sink to describe a situation where you have been pushed to the point of last resort. In addition to these three lines, poorer or younger men could be used as lightly armed skirmishers, and the equestrian classes would fill out the role of cavalry, being, as the name might suggest, the only ones who could afford horses. This new, more flexible fighting force was able to defeat the Samnites to the south and the Etruscan and Latin forces to the north, who had tried to take advantage of making Rome fight a war on two fronts. Only Magna Gracia in the south remained in the way of a Roman-dominated Italia. Facing the encroachment of these Roman barbarians as they saw them, the Greek cities of Magna Gracia sent out feelers for some help. They found it in the form of King Pyrrhus of Epirus. Their king Pyrrhus was actually a second cousin of Alexander the Great, and it would seem that military acumen ran in the family. Epirus sat at a crossroads, and had things gone differently, Pyrrhus might have made them a major power in the Western Mediterranean. He had plans to conquer Sicily, and he saw this invitation to embroil himself in Magna Gracia as the perfect opportunity to gain a foothold in the region. All he had to do was drive off some barbarians. How hard could it be? But as soon as Pyrrhus lined up against the Romans, he recognised that this was a well-drilled, organised army that he faced, not a barbarian rabble. Pyrrhus had managed to secure back-to-back victories against the legions, however, he could never land a killing blow. The Romans were able to retreat in an orderly fashion, denying the Epirots the chance to ride them down and slaughter them en masse. Equally, the Romans had inflicted massive casualties on Pyrrhus's forces before being driven back. Upon being congratulated on his victories, Pyrrhus replied that if he had won any more such victories, then he would be completely undone. This is the legendary origin of the term Pyrrhic Victory, which is a phrase used to describe a success that is so costly that it is akin to a defeat. Pyrrhus had come to Magna Gracia to bring the Greek cities there under his sphere of influence by destroying the encroaching Romans and then using the area as a springboard to achieve his greater ambition of conquering Sicily. But eventually, Pyrrhus did not wish to be bogged down fighting an enemy that his Greek allies had massively underestimated and undersold to him. Pyrrhus got his army out of there and went on to, unsuccessfully, invade Sicily. With their great defender abandoning them, Magna Gracia was soon under Roman control, and as such, all of Italia now called Rome master. In the aftermath of Rome dominating Italia, it would not be long before Rome found itself embroiled in further conflicts. The trade routes of the Western Mediterranean had long been controlled by Carthage, who had always enjoyed the status of being the big dog in the West. They had colonies dotted all along the Mediterranean coast and had sometimes traded and sometimes been in conflict with a number of tribes and city-states. But now there was another large power on their turf, and what was it I said earlier? This town ain't big enough for the both of us. Aside from setting up the coming Punic Wars, this era of Roman history had one other lasting effect. The sack of Rome by Brennus was a psychological scar that would never truly heal. Romans would forever be kept awake at night by nightmares of long-haired savages descending from the Alps and coming to tear apart their civilized society. Before long, we'll be covering the Caesar in Gaul campaign, so you'll want to remember that part. It will be on the test. So, how authentic a representation of the period is the Rise of the Republic campaign? I would say it does a fairly good job. I do like the fact that the game allows you, through research, to show the change of the Roman army from Phalanx to Monopole system. It also does a good job of representing the Etruscans as a culture group rather than a unified individual faction. There are, as always, things that aren't represented, and like last time, I'm going to focus on the things that I thought they could change. The first one is a minor gripe, and it is the absence of a Pyrrhus or Pyrrhus. The Epirates played a vital role in this period of history, and aside from Camillus, Pyrrhus was the man of the hour during the time this campaign was set. I would have liked it if the Epirates lurked menacingly on the edge of the map, just like the Persians did in the Wrath of Sparta. The fact that Carthage appears in this campaign and Epirus doesn't is baffling to me. While we are mentioning the Wrath of Sparta, unlike in that campaign where the city of Athens is well represented with its unique design of walls, the Rise of the Republic campaign does no such thing. The story of Rome's conquest of VA is given an extra layer of interest when you consider the unique architecture of VA's defences. It's a shame that they aren't included. The last thing I'll mention is the representation of the hill tribes. When selecting the Samnites, they are under the subgenre of Italic Tribes, so the game developers clearly understood that the Samnites were semi-nomadic and not a settled civilization like the Romans, Etruscans or Greeks. The main issue the Romans had when fighting the Samnites was their ability to abandon their settlements and retreat into the hills. In the Rise of the Republic campaign, the term Italic Tribes is just a distinction on a menu and isn't properly represented on the campaign or battlefield maps. Well, that about wraps it up. I hope you're enjoying this new series. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I've been Strat Tom, and I'll see you next time.